to the Audit Committee, and particularly those observers. Delighted to see there is some interest from fellow councillors. And just to say, as last time, I certainly want to ensure that they're able to answer questions after the committee has had a go at issues. And I think we've got two key items on tonight's agenda. First of all is Ian bringing us up to date on where we are with the council's financial position and our stability as an organisation. And to that end, I think Rebecca is going to say something about an initiative she's helped to lead in how we might respond to that. And the second substantive item, one of the more substantive items, well, particularly important item, shall I put it that way, is the corporate risk register. I mean, it's a very helpful overview of the very significant risks that the council is currently facing. An awful lot of very significant impacts on the council coming together, and seeing how the management team have assessed those risks and how they're responding. So there are some other important items, but I'd highlight those two as being critical ones for the Audit Committee in the present circumstances. So with that, can I launch into the meeting? And apologies for absence. Do we have any, Peter?
No apologies for absence.
Great, so everyone's here. Thanks for that. Next item is minutes of the previous meeting, which I think all went out, and unless anyone's got any corrections, just move to actions. Ian, I don't know, but we've got one action around the slides on the IT initiatives that I haven't seen.
Which page was that? Sorry, Councillor Sharman?
Yeah, page 2.
Page 2.
Chair, if I can just contribute to that, that was appreciated just before the meeting. So we're in the process of getting those together, and we'll get them sent out immediately following this, or tomorrow at the latest.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Mark.
Yeah. The update on, well, I think all the other things, there's an update that Ian's promised, but that'll be coming in the next meeting. I'm just flicking through this. Annual audit plan is with us. And I think that's it. So unless anyone else has got any matters arising, let's move on to, apologies, I missed the declarations of interest. Has anyone got any interest to highlight?
Yes, I'm on the board of a TMO in Hackney.
Great, thanks Michelle for reminding us of that. Right, okay, well let's launch straight in to Ian's report, and just to kind of set out the context of this, because it was in a minute I sent to committee members around the response that we are, and the areas of that Audit Committee has got a particular interest in, namely the resilience of the council's financial position going forward, and the adequacy of the management response, both in terms of resources and their projections. And that work, I'm delighted to say, we are participating with Rebecca and members of the scrutiny overview board, which I think is an important initiative. And maybe once Ian has reported, Rebecca, you could say a little bit about where we've got to and where we're going on that initiative. But let's kick off with Ian. Do you want to?
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Sharman, and good evening everyone on Audit Committee and everyone else who's joining us this evening. Can everyone hear me okay? Great stuff. how would you like to play this in terms of taking questions? Would you like me to? I'm very happy to take questions as we go if people indicate on the chat bar, or we wait till the end, whatever's works best for you.
Yeah, I mean, the problem I've got is I can't see everybody when you're presenting. So if I'm happy for it to be flexible.
If people indicate on chat, I can on this screen see people who've, the latest movements, if you like. So if people indicate on chat to come in, I'm happy to field those questions as we go, if that's okay with you.
Yep, no, I'm very happy with that.
Okay, splendid. So just to kick off then, and sort of in part by way of reminder, it doesn't seem that long ago, does it, that we were here for the April Audit Committee, how quickly the last few months have flown by and how much has gone on. So what this presentation looks to do this evening really is just bring you up to speed on what's been happening and what's changed, and also the work which we've undertaken to do to make sure that we continue to protect and maintain the council's financial position and its strong track record in relation to financial management. What I've looked to do on slide 2 is just summarise for people, and in part it's in part by way of reminder really, the fact that before all the COVID situation started, we had a scenario where when the budget was agreed back at the end of February, which seems a lifetime ago now, in our medium-term forecast, so that's for the financial years 2021, 22 through to 23, 24, we were forecasting we needed to find around about £19 million of further savings. That took into account our estimate at that time of what we anticipated any likely impact of the Fairer Funding Review to be, and any impacts from business rates retention. So it's just important to put that into the context of where we start from. So then we moved into a different phase. COVID happened and we had to react to what occurred. You'll know from the papers we've taken to Cabinet in April and May that we've identified over the current financial year increased expenditure pressures of around £25 million and reduced income pressures of around £37 million, totalling £62 million for the general fund alone. And in addition to that, we identified pressures for the housing revenue account of around £9 million, made up of, again, some expenditure pressures, but also some, as you'd expect, income pressures coming forwards from people being unable to pay their rent, bringing us to a total pressures for the COVID period of just of around £71 million. It was interesting that the second return, which is what the figures here are based upon, which we took to Cabinet back towards the end of May, was very much in line with what we'd initially estimated when we did that very detailed report to Cabinet back in April, and then we subsequently had that extensive audit committee that evening. Again, by way of reminder, so far Hackney's received 2 tranches of funding in terms of government support relating to COVID, totalling around £18 million, of which we received around just over £10 million in the first wave and around £7.5 million or so in the second wave, coming to the £18 million. And again, members of the committee will be familiar with the rationale for the change in the allocations, in that the methodology used for the second tranche was different. We're now expecting to complete a third return this month. Literally today, I've been notified that we will be receiving a further return to complete on Friday, which will need to be submitted by the 19th of June. So teams are already, as you'd expect, making the necessary preparations for completing that return. And we're already working through what that will look like based upon now we have 2 months worth of data. So I think that's all I want to say on slide 2. So unless anyone's got any questions, I'll move on to slide 3. I just wanted to set that context, which I think is very important from the outset, really. So moving on to the third slide, and you've heard me talk previously about what I call the structural impact of the COVID pressures on our medium-term forecast. So what I mean by that is the fact that, and to try and keep this simple, if we take council tax as the example, what has happened since the COVID outbreak started is we've seen a fall off in the number of people able to pay council tax, and effectively a reduction in our tax base, i.e. the ability we have to raise local income from our council tax base. And so what the team are doing on that and a number of streams, income streams and expenditure streams, is trying to understand that actually what is the impact beyond March 31st, 2021, because as I pointed out in slide 1, the financial forecast we include there is only for the current financial year. It doesn't, at this point, extrapolate into future financial years. And that's the detailed piece of work which myself, the team, working closely with Councillor Renison and members of Cabinet, are looking to make sure we do in absolute partnership with Councillor Sharman and Councillor Gregory from Audit and Scrutiny, respectively. But also, since COVID started, we've had some other news. One is that the Fairer Funding Review, not unexpectedly given the impact of COVID on demands on government, has been now deferred. Not clear until when, but it certainly won't be implemented in the financial year 21-22, which is, as you'll know from the previous briefings, relatively good news for us in that we were not expecting to be beneficiaries from any Fairer Funding Review. In addition to that, business rates retention has also been deferred. And again, that is something which had to happen, I think, with regards to any deferral of the Fairer Funding Review. Frustratingly, it's pretty fair to say, but understandable, that whilst we'd also hoped for a spending review to take place, and you'll know the government committed to doing this, that is now looking to be very unlikely. Whilst not confirmed it's not going to happen, it would be very surprising that it could happen given the uncertainties in the economy and the forecasts that exist of the resources any government would have to deploy. So what we are expecting in the autumn, and I think this is an important point for our lobbying, is that we really need to get home the message that local authorities in particular need clarity on next year's funding settlement soon, particularly with the impact that they're experiencing in relation to COVID. But I would be very surprised, always remain hopeful, but I'd be very surprised if we get more than a 1-year spending settlement for next year. We'll wait and see. Turning back to the structural matters though, and this is a bit I just want to draw people's attention to, because I think it's just helpful to set the context of the working environment that the teams are operating in, is that when we're doing our forecasts on income, and similarly on expenditure as well, but I think income hopefully brings it a bit more to life for people. You'll all know how great our leisure centres are and what a fantastic resource they are to the community. But on the outbreak of COVID, they all closed. And that meant that the income that we received for running those leisure centres and paying the staff to work there and paying for the facilities to be maintained and looked after dried up. What we don't know is on what basis they will or when they will reopen and at what capacity. Again, members of this committee, it'll be no surprise to you that leisure centres are particularly resource hungry, particularly where that involves water, particularly swimming pools. It's not the case that they are aspects of our business that that do much more than just cover their own costs. It's through the use of things like the gym stations, whereby the centres become more viable. And so what we're needing to look at is exactly how we model and forecast what the impact of reopening leisure centres will be, and whether and the extent to which they will not be able to run as economically as they did previously, which will then require us to make adjustments to budgets. Moving on to parking, we obviously saw through the lockdown period, not a surprise again, the significant reduction in parking income. People were not out and about driving. However, now that lockdown is easing, what we're starting to see, and I see as I walk around Hackney, walking over here today, more and more cars on the roads, people being reluctant maybe to use public transport to the levels that they did. And so we may actually see more uptake in parking in the sort of shorter to medium term. Again, these are sorts of things we're setting out in our forecasts and our assumptions. Turning to council tax and housing rents, what will be the impact on the economy of people's ability to pay rent, pay council tax, transition to universal credit or otherwise? Again, things we need to factor. So as an example, and I think some of you have heard me say this before, over the period of the last few months, what we've seen in terms of council tax is around 2,500 council tax direct debit cancellations. which is not a surprise because people quite understandably are struggling at this point in time. Similarly, on rents, we're seeing arrears increase. And again, I was in discussion with Councillor Renison only last week about the changes to our universal credit profiles as well. Of the data we've been able to access, we're seeing significant percentage increases in the numbers of people within the borough accessing universal credit. Moving on to business rates, again, you'll be familiar with the great work that the business rates team, David and his team have done to pay out the business rates grants to local businesses. Over £60 million of support to those businesses in a very quick fashion, in addition to applying the necessary business rate reliefs to business rate accounts. But understandably, businesses are really struggling where they can't open to trade. They've got no income to pay those rates bills or other bills. And that similarly then rolls into another area of our activity, which is our extensive commercial property estate, which we've held for many, many years and use as part of our ambitions to continue to drive the economy forward, but also to help us fund services. Again, a number of those have really struggled. Some haven't. Some of, particularly if you look at some of the supermarket chains who occupy some of our properties, obviously they've had a relatively a good run of things, but an awful lot of our businesses are really struggling, and the commercial property team is working so intensively with those local businesses to do all we can to support them with rent deferrals and also understand how we can help with reasonable lengths of repayment plans as well. An area on there which again I wouldn't want people to lose sight of, but is not unrelated, would be our commercial waste portfolio as well. Obviously John Whitley and his team do a fantastic job keeping this borough looking as great as it does. But actually, on the commercial waste side, they've worked really hard to develop that business, and it's really well received. But actually, where local businesses, particularly restaurants, aren't able to trade, there's no business for them. So that just gives you a sense, I think, of the sorts of challenges that we're looking to consider in updating our forecasts. You appreciate I've got some competition this evening for well in the back. So turning on to cash flow, what we wanted to do on this slide was really just to spend some time with Audit Committee this evening, understanding some of the headlines you've seen in terms of, and I'm sure stories you've picked up from local residents asking questions about, what's the council's cash flow position? Are you going to run out of money? And I think the point I would make, and sort of myself and Michael discuss this very regularly with Councillor Renson, is actually, whilst we are seeing a decline in our income streams, the council is still in receipt of significant sums of money. So we're not going to run out of cash to pay our bills. And I think that's the point I wanted to sort of get across to people today. You'll have all seen some of the stories of some councils who've been in the press around having Section 114 notices, having potentially issued. But I think my sense of things would be, and sort of from discussions I've had with colleagues in other places, that some of those councils, in fairness, were probably heading towards that place even before COVID and were really struggling. So I don't think, certainly from a Hackney perspective, as you can see there, we're certainly still receiving income from all the various sources we've discussed, and of course the big amounts of resource we also receive we're continuing to see the grant payments, if you like, the big block grant payments from government coming in as well. So although we've been impacted on the COVID pandemic, we're still seeing significant sums flowing into our cash flow, and we'll probably discuss this in a bit more detail in the Treasury Management paper later. Section 31 grants, in terms of simple terms, really, those are grants for that we receive where government has applied reductions to the business rates payable by local businesses. And I suppose the statistic I would sort of remind people of is, you'll all be familiar with the reliefs that were applied nationally across the board. But if you look from just a Hackney perspective, the supermarket chains saw reliefs awarded. So by that I mean the Sainsbury's, the Tesco's, all the supermarkets, Marks and Spencer's, all the ones you're familiar with, of over £3 million in the current financial year, which is an interesting context when we all consider the queues which exist for all of those. Turning then to the final point, and this is what you're again all familiar with in terms of just the level of detail we go into in how we manage our cash flow. So Michael, Pradeep and the team there have a really experienced team who manage our day-to-day treasury function. I know Councillor Gregory had the fortune a few years ago now of spending time with that team, understanding how it all works and hangs together. And again, that team is something which has continued to stand us in good stead at this time. So I'll maybe pause there for any questions. I can't see anyone signalling or coming in on the chat. Okay, I'll continue. Either it's all very clear or I'm not making it clear. But continuing on this slide, again, from a contextual perspective, we have investments, so that's cash on deposit in various institutions of around £112 million as at the end of May. And we've got some borrowings where we've undertaken tactical borrowings, particularly to fund some of our major capital acquisitions, and particularly those developments we're doing on the estate regeneration programme. In addition to that, we've also got other flexibilities within the what's called the CFR in terms of our headroom, and our options to increase. But obviously, as we've pointed out here, for every £20 million, say we borrow over 10 years, that incurs an annual charge of around £2 million. What sources of borrowing are open to us? Obviously, other local authorities are often a good source of cheap and flexible short-term monies. It did dry up very much at the end of March, as quite understandably authorities looked to hold on to what cash they had, but that has eased a lot. The PWLB continues to be a reliable source of income, but others exist, be it municipal bonds agency, even private banks. I mean, certainly in Hackney, our prime area is to focus on PWLB should we need medium or short-term borrowing, but we also do use other local authorities from time to time. Moving on to work that's ongoing, and had a really useful meeting this morning with Councillor Gordon, Councillor Sharman, Councillor Gregory and Councillor Patrick with Councillor Renison, which we'll come on to talk about, setting out the key work streams we've got to really get a sense of where the council is in terms of its finances, building upon the work we've done to date. And our aim is effectively a very detailed report to go to July's Cabinet, setting out where we are with regards to the current financial year. So I would see that as being our very much first full and proper outturn forecast for the current year, with an updated medium-term financial plan, building in on that, the impact and evolution of what's happened as we move into that next phase of COVID from where we started. That will include, as I outlined earlier, the review of all our income streams and our expenditure streams, and also a look at any investments that we had planned to make sure that that they are still what we want to do, and that ultimately still work in the current climate. As you'd expect, as we do every year, we'll have another look at where we are with our review of our reserves and balances to make sure that they're in the right place and that they're deployed, and whether any that had been held for particular purposes previously could be repurposed. And in addition to that, we'll look at all options to deal with any of those pressures coming forwards from COVID. Turning quickly then to where we are with the accounts and the audit process. Pleased to say that the audit has already commenced. You'll be aware of the fact that the publication date for draft accounts, because of COVID, got shifted to the 31st of August 2020, with publication of the audited accounts being pushed out to the 30th of November. That's certainly not something which we want to go towards having to do, and certainly our expectation at this point is that, working closely with Lucy and her team from Mazars, we will look to get our audited accounts produced by the 31st of July. Pension fund accounts are already underway and submitted for audit. We're just going through some final checks on the other aspects of the accounts, but an awful lot of the initial work that the team needs to do is all underway. And as I say, the audit has already started, and James and the team are working closely with Stuart, who's our audit manager, with Lucy, to make sure as much can be done in that pre-audit submission period as is possible. So as we've highlighted here, some of the areas under review would be pension fund banking, and working papers are being uploaded. So that's where we are, in a sort of a very quick whistle stop, hopefully tour through sort of the financial headlines of the day. I mean, the only other thing I would say is only late this evening, we just got notified that we've finally been allocated our monies for track and trace. Around just over £3 million from recollection was the figure that we've got for that, allocated on the basis of public health allocations as well. So that's probably all from me at this point, but happy to take questions.
Great, thanks very much, Ian. Well, I think the reassurance you've given on that our cash position is sound over the remaining part of this year is an important one for us, I think, and the work that is now being done to look at the medium term. I think those are both areas very much that are audit committee territory. I don't know, Rebecca, do you want to say a little more just to add to what Ian was referring to, that sort of review of where we go now, and then we'll open it up to questions on both issues.
Brilliant. Yeah, thanks, Nick. And I will keep it brief, but yeah, it's so members will be aware that we've reported to Cabinet twice so far on our financial position in like coronavirus, and those have included our submissions to government setting out our spend and drop in income so far. We'd already set out intention for the government asked for a third submission to do a deeper dive, and in particularly exploring some of those structural changes in income that Ian has touched on, looking at what the timescale for those might be, because it's going to be quite a long taper on some of these, in terms of the impact on the council's finances. Look at some of the mitigating actions, and just want to reassure people I'm not, using that in any way as code for cuts. Looking at our financial mitigation actions and ways we manage our money and things we might want to raise to the government. And to really bring that together and to bring that sort of deeper dive to July Cabinet. Aware that everything's moving quite quickly, we were keen to work with colleagues in scrutiny and audit. So we approached the two chairs, so Councillor Sharma and Councillor Gordon of Audit Committee and Scrutiny Panel respectively, and asked if they'd like to form a small working group to help feed into that process. And so hopefully that means, and just to reassure people, we will come back for the full scrutiny process. This engagement is in no way endorsement. We will be bringing it back and expect a full grilling from yourself, Nick, and colleagues on the final report. But we just wanted to be as open as we could. Apologies for taking the whole thing through the whole committee if time is permitted, but everything is moving very quickly. So we thought this was a way where we could perhaps work in a more joined up fashion, and help reassure people as well about some of the numbers and the calculations that are going into these forecasts, and where they come from and their impact. As Nick stressed, cash flow, we're actually in quite a strong position. We're talking about the longer term implications of the financial shortfall we're facing. But I'll leave it there, Nick, because I'm sure there'll be questions and people want to come in with comments and contributions.
Great, thanks very much. Crisp summary of where we are, and as I say, just to reiterate how delighted I am that we are clearing the way. So if, as I fear, there may be some difficult decisions down the way, at least we all understand how we got there and what our options are, and there is a sort of background of understanding about that. Great, shall we then move to question? I see one from Patrick. Do you want to open up?
Yeah, hello. Can you hear me?
Yep, go ahead, Patrick.
Yeah, I just wanted to go back to the first slide that Ian put up, which was about the the broad figures around the shortfall that we're potentially looking ahead. And the one that jumped out at me was the 37 million figure on income. Be helpful to know a bit more about some of the assumptions that we're making in coming up with that sort of figure. If that's possible. So that's my question.
Great, thanks. Shall we, Michelle has also indicated, should we ask Michelle what her question and then ask Ian to come back on both? Michelle, do you want to? Oh, no, she's.
Oh, can you hear me now? Sorry.
Yeah, you're on.
Thank you. Yes, I wanted to ask, obviously, there will be new ways of working and new ways of doing things as part of this process. So I just wanted to be assured that we'll whilst looking at the overall finances, we'll also be looking at some innovations too of how we can help people progress in this very difficult period. So just wondered how Ian envisaged that being worked up, and if you had the time actually and the capacity at the moment, if you could just give us a little bit of information on that. Thank you.
Great, thanks. And then I've got one from Claire as well. So should we do that? We'll do those three, Ian, if you're okay with that. Claire, go ahead.
I heard on the radio today that the OECD are talking about the economy, the UK economy, contracting by between 11 and 14%. And I wondered whether, as part of the financial planning, you're looking at taking into consideration those kind of figures, and on what measures you're looking at in terms of planning for that situation.
Yeah, very good point, and I think it underlines what a difficult road I think all of us have got to travel. Actually, it's not just the council. So thanks for those questions. Ian, are you able to respond on all three? Yes,
certainly. So absolutely, if I take the questions in the order that they were asked in. So Councillor Spence, thank you very much for that question. And I think I'm glad in a way that you've touched upon income, because this has been one of those things which has been more challenging at times to actually explain to central government officials, because they're so much used to dealing with services when there's crises, which have actually just additional expenditure. And a big exercise that's been undertaken, certainly by the various treasurer societies, has been to educate civil servants in exactly how local authorities are funded, and the fact that a lot of their funding is derived from income streams, and that's even more acute in areas where, say, a district council, which has a very small net budget, but actually gets a lot of its fees from things like parking, from leisure centres, from the usual sort of planning and environmental activities as well. So those authorities in particular have seen real pressures. But turning specifically to your question, about £37 million and how that's made up, we included in the report that we took to Cabinet in May a very detailed breakdown of the actual line-by-line analysis of what makes up that figure. So as an example, in terms of the £37 million, our assumption for the current financial year, so that's the whole of this year, is that we anticipate, in terms of business rates and council tax receipts alone, they equate into around £17.6 million of that 37. So it's again not a surprise that of the big areas of our income, council tax and business rates would be right up there as real, the sort of big areas. In addition to that, obviously parking income is another one, and what we've looked to do is take a view about the first 3 months of the year, and then a phasing of it over the following three, with a position through to the end of March in terms of how we anticipate the recovery happening. Building on that, we've obviously got other income losses, as I mentioned in the presentation earlier, around things like just the fees and charges from some of our leisure centres, from activities that take place in parks, so be it our some of our pitches and things that we hire there, some of the planning and pitch fees for tables sitting at outside restaurants where we can charge there. So there's a very extensive breakdown in that report we took to Cabinet in May that summarises all of that, and happy to get a copy of that to you if that's helpful. It also does the same analysis for the expenditure figure as well. Does that cover the points? Yeah, I can see.
I guess I can come in and add to that, Ian, as well, and say as well, it's in the context as well, the decade of austerity, and having had the 140 million or so taken out of our budget, that money that we generate ourselves has become even more important over time. And it feels like the government wants it both ways. They've made us become more self-sufficient, but now are holding back on coming to help when that income stream is under threat. So sorry, Ian, I'll let you go on.
No, I absolutely agree, and thank you for mentioning that, because I think that is the other contextual point that we've been referencing to officials. I should also say, and the report goes on to in detail, there's a detailed breakdown in terms of the housing revenue account as well, so it splits it out by council rents and then additional spend in the housing revenue account as well, which are also a big part of our challenge going forwards. Councillor Gregory, just so I'm clear on your question, I think I've understood it. Is it in relation to new ways of working for our staff and how we provide services? Is that, have I got the right end of the stick in terms of the question, and how people return to basically, how the fact that it's not going to be possible to reopen the service centre, as an example, in the way it was opened 3 months ago, and how we're adapting and changing?
Thank you. Yes, it is partly that, but it's also things like a different offer for people, like perhaps using our open spaces, looking creatively at the premises and spaces we have, and how we can facilitate activities for children, activities for older people, maybe so some sort of creative review. I guess that's what I mean. I'm just wondering how much time you have to do that, considering how busy you already are.
So in terms of, I'm glad you've asked that question. It's one that I'm very happy to answer. So if I take what we're doing in terms of managing the workforce first to get them remobilised, and also make sure we don't lose any of the real strides that have been made around, really intensifying our work on inclusivity, and making sure that we continue to make progress in relation to gender pay gap, BME pay gap, all those things, and so that's very much at the heart of what it is we're doing. But obviously, the buildings that we currently have and operate, it's not possible to simply go back to how they were. So if I use a service centre as an example, considerable work's been undertaken over the last month or so to make sure that it can reopen, but reopen in a safe fashion. So, for instance, people would enter, as you've probably, people have seen, as is happening in the wider economy. Now you enter a premises through one door, you leave through another door, and only so many people enter at one point in time. And so similar sorts of things have been going on in the service centre. Similarly, they've been looking at making sure people's desks are appropriately spaced out. So probably in a similar fashion to what we've all seen in Parliament, where now people don't sit almost on the days you sit in Parliament, they almost seem to sit on their knees. But they've now got a lot more space between them, and that's what we're doing in the service centres, and looking very carefully at the facilities, be it the breakout areas, kitchens, and also obviously the bathroom facilities as well. So that work and thinking is going in, but also looking to make sure that staff who are at home are really also not forgotten and are supported, because I know from experience from a number of our teams who Michael and I've regularly speak to, actually going from a space of where you came into the office every day to suddenly spending all day alone at home with nowhere to go. You got to go watch the football with your friends, go to the pub or whatever, go to meet out with people. It's quite difficult, and I know certainly in some of our teams, there'll be some real people really struggled, and we've been looking to make sure that they're properly supported, and so that's why what the council's put in place is a real intensive work programme to assist with the next phase, and how people are, how we adapt to the new working environment, and really make sure that all the support that goes in terms of people's health, mental health and well-being is actually thought through, and that we don't lose, as I say, some of those really important strides that we've been making pre-COVID. In terms of your point about moving forwards, in terms of thinking about how our spaces are used, that work is ongoing, and I think I think that will only have to intensify. I think some people on the call have heard me say that I could envisage a space where we have to give some consideration to some of the other buildings that we occupy, be it a leisure centre. Actually, what's more of a priority? Is it getting people to have an education, kids to have that FaceTime with teachers? And so would we have to maybe repurpose some of our big facilities to create more space? I'm sure some of us saw on the television the other night where some schools in some parts of the country are having like temporary, I think I even saw an article in the paper actually, and yesterday there's a Hoxton architect who's designed, is it like tense, for want of a better word, that some schools are looking at. I would imagine all that thinking is going to be needed, and actually is already starting to happen. You know, I made a comment the other day that actually, you know, with the Picture House still not able to open as a cinema, actually, would it be better as a sort of a lecture theatre for students to be taught in? Because I don't know, and I think that's the sort of thinking we'll have to have similarly with other facilities. But yes, it's very much something which is being given thought to in terms of the reset and the restarting of services. Councillor Potter, you asked a question in terms of the OECD forecasts, and what I would say is absolutely, the report which Councillor Renison took to Cabinet with us on in May absolutely referenced the challenges that have been forecast in the economy in terms of its impact on you know, public finances, and I think that is why I would be very surprised if government's able to come forwards with a multi-year spending round, simply because it hasn't got the certainty of what the economy or what the public finances can afford. So we did include in the report in May a big section on our thinking and our assumptions around that very important point.
And just building on that, if that's okay, one of the challenges and one of the things we're looking at in the report we've been forward in July is the levels of uncertainty in all of our forecasting. Because previously you might have had one or two areas where there were uncertainty, and now there's so many strands of work across the council. It's quite difficult in terms of income and expenditure, and Nick's been already pushing on this and that, you know, we have to narrow them down as tightly as we can, but still, like, you might have a couple of areas you're not sure about, but to have that on the scale we have it now puts us in a very different position to previous years. You know, Ian, Mike and the team done a fantastic job of really tight control of our finances, and our forecasting was, you know, really accurate. We knew where our pressures were, we knew what our income was going to be, we knew where we had some room for manoeuvre, and that's going to be quite different. And the only thing, and I hate to be the person that brings this word into the mix as well, but in terms of looking at our we're already aware of the likely economic impact of Brexit and what that might mean as well, and that applies across the council's work. So some of that thinking's there already and carries over. We won't start the conversation of the two effects and the compound effect of possibly a no-deal Brexit and the economic impact of coronavirus. We'll save that for another day, maybe.
Well, it all goes into the mix, actually. I mean, when we are going to be looking at these forecasts, and I absolutely go along with both what the point you've just made, Rebecca and Ian, about we're going to have to get used to forward forecasts that have got a broad range within them, and to understand the uncertainties and degree of uncertainty within those. So I think it's going to need a much more sophisticated understanding of our financial position, and that's obviously one of the jobs that the Audit Committee can help oversee. So thanks for that. Anyone else want to come in? Good. I'm not seeing any indication. So if we move on from that, as I say, just to finally say about the working group that I've undertaken with Michelle to report back on a regular basis to where we get to with that, so everyone is fully up to speed with that process and where we're going with it. So I'll certainly do that over the next couple of months. Good. Can we then move on to item 5, which is the performance overview? The issue here, I think, is that it goes up to Q4, which honestly ends right now at the lockdown phase. So performance is not something I think we need to spend a lot of time on, the past performance, but I have although perhaps with one issue that emerged from the numbers, which is we were already in difficulties over things like rent arrears, seeing that pressure increasing. And of course, as Ian has said earlier, that has intensified with the COVID. So the issue of pressure on our residents in terms of particularly of tenants was already evident. Bruce, can you just respond on the red item, those couple of red items that I've indicated in on the March report, but more to the point, if you can just give us a summary of where we now look 6 weeks, 2 months into COVID in terms of performance.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I think, as you said, and as Ian's highlighted, things have moved on, and the pressures are most definitely around sort of income and sort of expenditure and performance related to those. So rent arrears has increased. I'm sure Ian can talk to you more if needs be, but it's around the, I'm just looking up, sorry, the figure, it's about £1 million over the 2 months up to the end of April. So I know Ian's got a slightly later figure than I have. And sort of parking income has also obviously dropped, that Ian's already highlighted. So those two areas are under pressure. And voids is another one where voids relet times have continued to increase. On the flip side, our sort of main contact with residents around call centres and things like that have held up very, very well over the period, and contact has been good. And considering the whole shift of everyone to remote working, those figures are as high, if not higher, than they were pre-COVID.
So is that, can we broadly say that the council services have proved resilient from your performance numbers during the last 6 weeks? Is that the conclusion we can draw?
Yeah, broadly, I mean, obviously, with the exceptions that particularly Ian's highlighted already around leisure, parking, council tax income, sort of the ones that are sort of income related are obviously under pressure, and obviously some services are closed, but the ones that remain open and the ones with customer contact have held up well, considering, and in saying things like actually contact centres are actually got a slightly higher rate of performance than they had pre-COVID.
And I think on that point, on the contact centres, it's probably just worth, if members don't recall, that one of the decisions we took very early on in this crisis was to move away from having those three sort of contact centres, i.e. the corporate one, the repairs and the housing one, to bring them under one separate management, because that was felt necessary as we needed to move towards full remote working. Earlier, picking up on Councillor Gregory's question really about lessons learned and some things that we will be able to look at, it would be very unlikely we'd ever move back towards having separate contact centres again, because it's worked so well. And I think, as Bruce has outlined, the satisfaction of customers has also continued on an upward trajectory, as well as the performance. So very, very important point.
Great. Yeah, no, that's exactly the sort of thing that I think we've got to pick up more generally. Any questions on performance that people want to raise? Yeah, Patrick.
Hello. Yeah, I've put it in the chat, but I was looking at page 24 about the rent revenue. What sort of percentage drop we're talking about? Because the figure I've picked up from page 24 is between week 49 and 53. There was a drop of 24.7% reduction in payments. Is that correct? So am I reading that right?
What I suggest is, and as sort of Councillor Sharman's alluded to, that the papers here probably are of a time, if you like. So if I've got an update on the whole sort of rents position. So hopefully that will answer your question in the round, and I'll make sure I cover off that point. So if it's okay with Councillor Sharman, if I just answer that question, unless you want to let someone else come in with another question.
Yeah, no, Michelle's indicated, so let's try and take those together. Yep. Michelle, do you want to go ahead?
Hi, yes, just something I picked up on the planning enforcement issue. It also, this is slightly off subject, but it also highlighted to me that we'll be expected to do more enforcement on things like businesses, risk assessments and social distancing, etc. So I wondered, just following on from the planning enforcement and how far we're a little bit behind on some of those cases, if there was an enforcement kind of department that would be, who's going to undertake the additional enforcement work we're going to be expected to do? Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I can probably cover some of that. Maybe Bruce give me help with some as well. So if I deal with Councillor Spence's question first, and this is just sort of context really. So as at the middle of March, we were on target to hit a 97% collection rate for housing rents. We had arrears of around £4.7 million. We had total number of people in receipt of universal credit on our books of just over 2,600. We had tenants in arrears of just over 7,000, and that's against a total number of tenants of 20,600. As at the end of May, what we've started to see in terms of overall collection rate is it dropping from 97 to around 94%. We've seen arrears rise from 4.7 million to 6.2. We've seen a substantial increase in the number of tenants who are in receipt of UC from 2,600 to 3,500, and the numbers of tenants in arrears have risen from, say, 7,100 to 8,300. Turning back to the last financial year, so rent collection performance at year end, so at March, ended up at the year as 96.7%, against what was our target of 97.5%, and really that the shift away from target in the 1920 financial year really came about in that last 2 weeks of March as COVID started to bite, and we saw that significant impact on rent collection. And really what we've seen, and we've seen this in the sort of numbers coming through in March, in April and May, is that continued impact on rental income, with rent arrears rising. We also, as members will be aware, took a decision across our income generation streams to hold back on arrears escalation and enforcement action since lockdown. So as an example, court and warrant applications were put on hold. Touched upon the increase in universal credit claims. We're probably seeing, as I say, around about 100 claimants a week joining the list in April, and around 50 in May joining. We are getting feedback that tenants are saying to us that they're struggling to pay as more lose their jobs or find themselves furloughed. And I think the other interesting aspect of it, if you like, is that we'd worked hard to provide tenants with options to pay, but obviously one of the other factors we've seen is, and I've seen this with council tax as well, is we do still have a number of residents in the borough who like to pay, we obviously closed our cash office a few years ago, but there are still a number of tenants, particularly elderly tenants, who actually like going out to the post office to pay their rent to various other places, and actually that hasn't been possible in the current situation, and we have been working hard now to make sure that those people are supported to enable them to pay, because there are people who just haven't been physically able to get to pay. It's not that they haven't been able to pay. As I alluded to with council tax, we've seen on housing some fall off in direct debits and standing order. But we are working closely, income teams are calling residents in arrears to encourage them to make payments, and Councillor Edison's been leading on an initiative to build upon our approach to the corporate debt policy to actually make sure we engage with people, because one of the bits of feedback I had most clearly from our council tax team was they could see that once people got into difficulty, the worst thing that happens is they don't engage with us. It's if they engage with us and we can help them to access other forms of support, be it the council tax hardship scheme, be it housing benefit, be it universal credit or other forms of benefit, be it our council tax reduction scheme. That's a far better way of getting them out of challenges in the future if they just let debt grow. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yep, thanks very much. And Michelle's
social. This was, if I got this one right again, just to clarify, Councillor Gregory. This is about the enforcement team and it having a role, say, for example, are you trying to get at, would we have a role in making sure that queues outside shops are sort of 2 meters apart?
I think something a little bit more in depth than that, making sure that all our businesses have risk assessments, so all our areas where the public go. And
so I think there's
perhaps doing spot checks, and or if someone had concerns about an organisation and being safe, or would that come under the health and safety inspector externally? I'm not quite sure.
I think that's the reason I used the example of the queues outside shops is there's been extensive discussion on this, and it is not a role or responsibility of local authorities to even attempt to do that. Yeah, the idea that we'd even have the resources to do it and could have is unlikely. In all honesty, what I suggest that we do, Bruce, is if we just take away, in the spirit of the way Councillor Gregory's asked the question, to clarify what interventions we can make in this space, because I think my understanding is that our role is actually fairly limited in what powers we actually have. So
yeah, some of it is limited. There are certain points where we can step in, but for majority of sort of workspaces and everything, that will fall under the health and safety executive. But there are points where we will step in, but I can get that clarified and let you know what they are.
Yeah, thank you.
Great, thanks. I see Dawn nodding vigorously when you said our powers were limited, and but it'd be helpful to get some sort of background on that. Just conscious that Sharon and Cam are with us, and do feel free to ask questions as well if you want. Are there any other points on this aspect of performance? Okay, the other parts of the performance overview relate to risk, and I propose, given that we've got the corporate risk register, we don't need to do that as a separate item. The other capital, and what we've got is the final report on capital items for up to the end of March. I just wanted to make a quick point on that because it reinforces something I think we said earlier in the year, which is we've got an outturn of £230 million spend against a revised budget of 247 and an original budget, as I read our original budget, of 300. And I just think it just emphasises the need for us to improve our estimating ability. And that was something we were going to do a deep dive on. And I think these numbers just reinforce that. When we can get round to that, obviously, I'll talk to Ian about that in terms of our abilities under the current pressures. Sharon, you've just raised an issue. I sort of missed it in the chat.
I was just trying to assist the Commission that actually it's trading standards are responsible, I think, under the COVID regulations for enforcing public safety in businesses regarding social distancing, but not for staff.
Right, thanks for that. I wasn't aware of that.
It's something I've come across in my day job, so yeah. But it's trading standards that were responsible, but not for staff, but for the public. But of course, we have, although it's not our responsibility. I mean, Hackney has gone out of its way to make sure, by extending pavements, to make sure that people can social distance safely outside some of our major shops. And I think we deserve the credit for that.
Definitely. Well, I think that will feed nicely into a note that I think maybe with Dawn's support will do for us, so we're aware of what our responsibilities and capacity is. Great. Okay. Well, I'm proposing then to move on to the corporate risk register, which is the other very substantial item that we've got here. And it does, I think, measure up even before COVID really bites. Although there are quite a lot of references to COVID, clearly it mainly relates to issues already in the pipeline, and there's an awful lot of red on it. And I don't know, Matt, well, is Ian or Matt, are you going to introduce
I'm mindful you've heard an awful lot from me already this evening, so as Matt's on the call and done so much of the work in this report, I'm happy for him to present and kick off with if that's okay with you, Chair.
Yep. Okay, go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, hi there, everyone. I think, the obvious difference to last time is the immediate escalation of the pandemic risks to the top of the register, as you can see. The angle that we take with this pandemic risk is the risk of the pandemic now persisting longer than expected, or indeed a second wave taking hold. Clearly, things are developing daily, and we are reflecting this on a daily basis. But because committee papers are signed off a few weeks in advance, you'll understand not everything in the text is completely up to date. The shadow of COVID-19 can be seen all over the corporate register, as the chair has just alluded to. The financial risks reflect the increased expenditure and reduced income resulting in the shortfall that Ian has spoken about in great detail. Of course, in mitigating this, we have the hope and expectation of increased central government funding. Again, as Ian said, the fair funding review has been delayed, but obviously long term, this is something that could still be detrimental to the council's finances. Brexit, at the last time that we saw the corporate register, was previously the headline risk. It is still critical. The new risk now with relation to Brexit, of course, is that the COVID crisis is diverting attention potentially from Brexit negotiations, which may increase the probability of a no deal. Looking through the rest of this register, if we look at other risks, for instance, ones relating to pensions, workforce, corporate resilience, procurement, universal credit, all of these have been, as you can see, impacted on by COVID. But hopefully, in looking at the controls and the descriptions, management should be able to provide you as members assurance that we are doing our best to manage these risks, even though a lot of these risks have external influences. In light of all the recent COVID-related drama, of course, we shouldn't lose sight of other risks within this register. For example, the climate change risk, which was a new risk, which was escalated at the last meeting relating to our target of net zero emissions. This remains very much on the radar and critically important. So, yeah, that's an overview of what's within there, but obviously there's a lot of scope for questions on any of the various areas that we have in the register.
Great. Any points that people want to highlight? I just picked out of the pandemic, the vulnerability on finance that we've talked about, vulnerability of our supply chain in terms of backup, the risk of fraud opening up in a number of areas, internal and external. Children, vulnerable children, which were already under pressure with because of budget reductions and service now being exaggerated. Food poverty, which I think is well emerge as a major issue over the next few months, particularly as furlough runs down, but is already a pressure I'm sure members will find in their wards. And homelessness, where we go with homelessness if there isn't support for the current arrangements. I just picked those out as the kind of top elements of high risk for us, but it just emphasises how broad-ranging this is going to be for the council. So, points, people. Any points people want to raise on that? Okay, I think that it's more a kind of sobering response. I guess what we need to be clear about is that management, from my reading of this, seems to have got their heads around all the risks around. I think for obvious reasons, we're not able always to have a full response to them, and I think that will emerge. But I think, given the pressures on us, the need for us to keep a very tight hold on management response as well as management awareness of these risks is going to be a key issue for us. Good, and I have a question now from Michelle.
Hi, yes, thank you. Just wanted a bit more, maybe not now, maybe if it could be sent on to us, information about contracts and force majeure issues around insurance, because I know insurance is changing, of what we can insure, what we can't insure, and the risks in terms of new contracts and old contracts. So it might be good to have a little bit more detail, but perhaps I'm happy to receive that after the meeting. Thank you.
Okay. I can see Councillor Sharman's on mute.
Oh yeah, sorry. Yeah, no, just saying thanks for that, Michelle. Are you able to respond to?
So what I'd say is that we gain no surprise that the insurance team have been particularly active over the last few months. They always seem to be active. There's always something happening. And I understand particularly the question Councillor Gregory's asked. What I will do is I'll take you up on the offer to maybe just get the team to pull together a note that deals with the spirit of your question. So Michael and I will take that away to work on with the insurance team, and we'll get that circulated to members of the committee in pretty quick order.
Great. Okay. Just one issue I wanted to raise, if there's no other issues, is commercialisation. And we've referred earlier to where we're going. We're going to be under pressure in a number of our commercial activities already. And there are both opportunities and risks here. And there's a reference to having a more collective oversight of commercial activities. And I just wondered if you could say a little more about that.
So I think that relates in particular to, you could pick it up in part in what's highlighted in risk 35 in the creation of new companies. What Dawn and I have been very keen to make sure of is the fact that where we are entering into anything that has a degree of commerciality to it, be it setting up companies in relation to housing, commercial waste, is another example of a company we were on the brink of actually establishing, but we've stepped back from that now, given the current crisis. We need to just assess our capacity and our understanding of the market to see whether it's still is an area we want to move into. But I think it's to try and make sure that there's a greater consistency of how we approach some of this. So it's probably, the wording probably sounded a bit grander than maybe than it actually is, but it is about making sure that corporately, so through legal, through finance, through other governance functions, that services aren't going ahead and doing things without proper clarity over what needs to happen with, if you do establish a company, getting your bit of the accounts done, your directors fully understand their responsibilities and that side of things. So that's what I get a sense of that point was getting at.
Great. Well, I mean, I welcome all that, and I think it's absolutely essential that you start off on the right basis. But I think 2 points I'm very much encouraged, which is a corporate attitude to building up your commercial arm and taking responsibility, and not just in terms of setting it up. It's the continual monitoring and response that the council, well, all commercial operations are vulnerable to. So I do think as we move into this field, we've previously been largely around a property-based one in which we've got particular expertise. We're now moving into areas of commercial activity which are more uncertain, or we have less background in. So I'm very concerned that we do take that risk very seriously and have a management response that's long-term as well as immediate.
I saw Councillor Potter, I think, had a question.
I missed that. Sorry, Claire. Go ahead.
Hello there. Thank you. We talked at the last audit committee about the impact to the capital supply programmes for the regeneration of our estates, and I wondered whether you could just give us an update on those, on any delays or any changes since we last met.
Excellent. Is that Ian or Matt?
I can certainly can cover that if that's okay. Yeah. So I think what I would say is that the various teams who are delivering these programs have worked very hard over the last few months to, where it is practicable, to make sure we keep on track as many of our schemes as we can. Obviously, there's some which had to stop because it wasn't possible to maintain social distancing or or it was felt by the contractors they weren't happy to continue. Others were able to do so. So as an example, you'll know the great work that Morgan Sindel did on the Britannia Leisure Centre and the school to be able to continue to continue the development, continue keeping that scheme on time and on budget, but also to maintain the necessary, very important health and safety, social distancing issues, to the extent where they've been commended by the DFE for the work that they've done and held up as a showcase for that. Obviously, the housing programmes, Councillor Potter, are quite extensive, and there are lots of schemes in them. What I can do with Councillor Renison is maybe just get a short note together for you in terms of each of the different schemes that are currently in train, just to give you a heads up of where that programme is. That's probably the best way of answering that question, if that's okay. I don't know if Councillor Renison wants to add anything to that.
I think that's a helpful, and I think it's a note that should go around to everybody. I think it's a useful oversight of where we are. Great. So, anything more on risk? As I say, I think this is a very sobering report about the challenges we face anyway, let alone with the added pressures of COVID and likely pressures on resources over the next year. So I think, again, Matt, just keeping us really updated on our regular meetings through our, we've got the regular report on corporate risk, but never have I seen it more important than right now. Yep, I've got Claire coming in again. Yeah, go ahead.
It was just to ask a kind of similar kind of question to ask for an update on the risk to our pensions in kind of very broad brush terms.
I think on that one, I could probably cover a lot of that now. In that, so you'll all be familiar with what happened in terms of the valuation and the way that fed into our budget for the current financial year and the next two. But actually, that was based upon a valuation taken on 31st of March 2019. So in reality, what we're seeing, and certainly Michael, myself, Rachel, and Councillor Chapman have regular catch-ups with our advisors and our actuaries, is that there's nothing material coming through to say that at this point that the issues of COVID have had an impact upon our pension fund in terms of its values and its sustainability. Obviously, it's still early days in this crisis, and in terms of, again, picking up on your point where you made reference to the OECD, there are some newspapers that go on to say that beyond a recession, we might even head towards a depression. Don't know, not to sort of speculate on the rights or wrongs of that obviously, but at this point, sitting here now, touch wood, is that actually we're not getting indications from our actuaries, from our advisors, that anything in our pension fund and our assumptions that underpin it are causing us cause for concern at this stage. But what we will be doing is
reassuring, but obviously that's something, the Pensions Committee will keep us informed about as well. Great. Okay, shall we move on then? I've got, a nice bridge into the quarterly Treasury update. Who's going to give this?
Councillor Simon?
Go ahead, Michael, yeah.
Okay. I mean, basically, it's the normal Treasury Management report. It covers the first 2 months of the financial year. Basically sets out the activity that's taken place over that period. I think this report actually reinforces what we said in the first item about cash flow, in that we haven't taken out any further borrowing throughout this period. And actually, our investments, so our cash available, has actually increased over the period. So, as at the 1st of April, we had £79 million of investments. And not unusually, they rose during the first couple of months to, as of today, we've actually got £116 million worth of investments, of which 57 million is immediately liquid, so we've got it in money market funds that we can draw down as and when required, and another 28 is available within 28 days. They're on core accounts, Some of the others are slightly longer term investments with other authorities have borrowed from us. So I think that reinforces the point that we made earlier about we're not in a position we're about to run out of cash. Obviously, whilst it is business as usual in terms of treasury management, we are very aware of the issues. As Ian pointed out, the inter-local authority market did dry up very rapidly at the end of March, beginning of April, which meant we couldn't go to them for short-term borrowing cash flow purposes if we needed to. But that is starting to come back, as I think some of the councils are starting to realise that the cash is still coming in, as we've said already. Yeah, obviously, as I said, there's business as usual for us. We're just keeping a real tight eye on the cash flow, monitoring closely the actual income coming in compared to what we used to receive in terms of things like the big areas around council tax, business rates, etc. But some of those shortfalls where we've had there have been offset by some of the measures where, as I say, we've had Section 31 grants up front from the government for the business rates. And we've also had things like deferments of the government announced that we don't have to pay our share of the business rates into the pool, national pool, the central government share for 3 months, which have just helped ease the worries, I think, at the beginning of the year where there were some concerns at the outset of COVID that we would have issues. But I'm comfortable, as Ian's already set out, that we're in a good position on cash flow, and we're just continuing business as usual, albeit making sure our cash flow is updated on a more regular basis to reflect actuals.
Great, thanks very much. I mean, I must say it's reassuring that we're not having to take recourse to expensive loans, that we've still got fairly ready cash on. Obviously, at some point, cash and reality will collide, but what we've got is a fairly liquid position at the moment, is what I'm hearing.
And I think if you think even before COVID, we've always been saying that we will need to borrow during this financial year. So it's not changed that outlook at all, really. I think we will need to, although that again depends on what we do with capital programme and areas like that. But it's not. I don't think it's forcing any particular changes to COVID on our treasury management.
Great stuff. Thanks very much. I'm not getting any questions, so I propose to move on to the internal audit annual report. Is that Michael or Tracy? Am I looking?
I'm going to deal with that one today for you.
Thanks, Tracy. Go ahead.
Councillor Sharman. Hi. Nice to see you. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, nice to see you. Go ahead.
Okay. As many of you know, this is an annual report that we present to you on the performance of the Internal Audit Service. And it includes my opinion as the acting head of internal audit about the control environment within council. This year I've also included for you to review in ahead of the statement of accounts, the annual governance statement, because I was conscious that you raised last year the fact that Audit Committee, perhaps their role in overseeing governance wasn't perhaps highlighted enough in the annual governance statement last year. So we felt as officers it might be beneficial to let you have this in advance of the statement of accounts so you have a chance to just review it. Obviously you do eventually approve it as part of the statement of accounts, so it's really here just for information purposes for you. But anyway, going through the main report, there's just a couple, maybe 4 points to draw to your attention. Page 120 shows the overall assurance levels for the council, and the direction of travel continues to improve. And I've made an assurance decision of adequate for the council this year, so that's good. We consider that the control environment remains robust, and that, as I said, all areas in general are improving. Then we go down to page 124, we start looking at internal audit performance, and our target is to have high recommendations 90% implemented within timeframes. As at the 31st of March, we had 80% fully implemented and 13 partially. This may be slightly underestimated because normally we would chase managers at this time when we were producing this report for updates, but because of everything that was going on with COVID-19, if we didn't get a response, we didn't chase them. So the actual figure may be slightly better, but it's still quite a good result there. In regards to our performance in relation to the number of audits we did, we were at the end of the year, 79% were completed or in progress, which is slightly down on our 90% target. I feel that that was affected a lot with COVID because February and March are quite a busy time of year for us to try and get things finalised and in place. And obviously, at that time, the council went through a major shake-ups, and many people going to work from home, redeploying staff and things, and it was almost impossible for us to do our normal end-of-year work at that time. We are gradually doing a little bit of that as we've been going along. And also, as I think was reported to you last meeting when you approved the audit plan, we did include a large contingency as a result of what the impact of COVID-19 might have on our ability to undertake audits. This quarter, we've focused largely on trying to finalise anything that was outstanding from last year, which we could deal with operational managers on, and also trying to set up all the terms of reference for the plan for this current year, so that when we are at a position where we are able to undertake any audits, all the background work will be in place and we'll be ready to go straight away. Following on from that, on page 129 is the usual breakdown of all the assurance levels for individual audits. That's fairly self-explanatory. And then the AGS starts on page 155. And I've also, as part of your concerns, I've added a more in-depth paragraph about the Audit Committee's role on page 157, which just gives a little list of the things that you were involved with during the year. You'll notice, those of you who've been around for a while looking at this annual governance statement will notice that we've had a significant overhaul of the format of this particular document, and it's been significantly streamlined with bullet points identifying the rationale under the rationale of assurance opinion in a coloured graph in red, green and yellow, and that's to try and make it easier for readers of it. So a lot of the descriptive text that used to be in the old report has been removed. Excuse me. And as before, there is an action plan identifying. We've identified 4 key areas as being our most challenging areas for the coming year, and they are included in the action plan, along with what we're planning to do to take that forward. Other than that, I'll leave it for any questions.
Great, thanks very much. I guess just while people consider whether they've got any points they want to raise, just to say great. First of all, that we do see this ahead of time, that we're not pitched the government statement right at the end, which we happened last year. So I'm grateful for doing that and involving us early. Just I'd add on the role of the audit committee. I think it'd be worth just sticking in a line about our deep dive look at some key risks that we faced, and because again I see that as one of the key ways that we can back you up in terms of internal audit, of looking at particular high risk areas. The only and I do think that the improving governance statement from 162 is very helpful, particularly the note on children and SEND services, contract oversight in housing and so on, things that sometimes get a bit lost. I just one of the things I wanted to raise was that climate change is rightly identified as a real challenge. I'm not yet convinced that we've now got a strategy as opposed to some very good long-term intentions in place, and that's certainly something I would like to see us address, whether it's appropriate in the context of internal audit, but it's certainly a gap, it seems to me, in terms of our overall risk profile. So I'm still not seeing any questions. Tracy, do you want to just answer those points while we see if there's anyone who wants to raise any?
Okay. You mean about the deep dive, the comment about the deep dive?
It's just a very small point about just saying it's another way in which the Audit Committee is backing up and is part of improving governance. That's all. I don't want to make a big thing out of it. It's more a note.
Okay. If I can include it, I will, but the draft has already gone as part of the statement of accounts for auditing. So if it's possible to include it, I will. If not, I'll try and add it somewhere.
I see Lucy. You can tell us whether.
Sorry, I'm working off a phone, so I'm really sorry because my laptop doesn't pick up on this.
Lucy, are we able to take an overview on that? Yes, Lucy's indicating we can include it as part of the audit process. I'm grateful for that.
Okay, that's fine. I'll do that for you. The other thing I was going to say was I would really like your feedback on the format of it, because obviously it's a new format for the council, and I'd like to be sure that you're happy with how we've changed it, so that we don't carry on next year and you say, actually, we didn't like that format. So if anybody has any comments, I'd like to hear them. You can let me know later on. It doesn't have to be now. And what were the other things you asked me about then? Climate change. Climate change.
Coloured bit.
Yeah, the climate change. I believe we've actually got something on the audit plan for that this year to look at.
Great.
But
I just couldn't immediately see it. Maybe I missed it. I think just answering your point about the format, I'm seeing Michelle nicely summarise what I think too, which is I think it's a much more readable and attractive set out than we've had in the past, which has been a kind of succession of rather dense prose. So I like the way it's been broken up a bit and just a bit of colour in it. So I certainly liked it. I don't know if other colleagues have got any other comments. Great.
Okay. There's one more thing. You do need to approve the charter and strategy, and just for information, the only thing that's changed is the date. So it's the same document, but it does need approval.
Well, I move. I can't see any dissent in the. Yes, no, it's easy. Even some clear indications of support, and Michelle's come in too. Great. Okay, that's formally recorded as a decision of the committee. Great, thanks very much, Tracy. And we now move on, I think, to Michael for the fraud report.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me?
I can. Yep, go ahead.
Great. So this is a backward-looking review at the year for the investigation teams, and I'll talk you through some of the highlights from that. And then I'll go on to just discuss a little bit about how the investigation service is functioning at the moment through lockdown and what the focus is. And then also round off with a look at some of the challenges for us specifically as a service for the year ahead. So first of all, with the retrospective look at the year, I'll kick off with a good news story that the headline figure, the benefit from investigations work for the year, where we can quantify, is just shy of 5.7 million. And that's compared to last year, the overall value that we were able to put on the work was just in excess of 4.6 million. So over $1 million extra in terms of performance this year compared to last. So breaking that down by the areas that we traditionally put a lot of resource and time and have a lot of investigations in. First of all, the blue badge work, there was almost a doubling in terms of financial output on that. That was largely because the council's car pound came back online, which enabled us to enforce more effectively and remove more, ticket more, and also has helped to inform our ability to now prosecute. And there was the first prosecution of a blue badge case for several years during the course of the year, and there are more cases in the pipeline that should lead on to court sanctions as and when the court system gets moving again. With regard to no recourse to public funds, we have an investigator embedded with the CYPS team who works with them on a daily basis, attends all the key meetings, and there was a 20% increase in the performance outcomes from the NRPF work during the year. And I think that's probably mostly down to being involved with nearly all of the cases that pass through that team, so that the chances to assist and deliver a benefit aren't missed. The biggest area of return that we have each year is with the tenancy fraud investigations, and I'm delighted to report that they are back on track. You'll appreciate there was a dip in that over a couple of years, but there was a 34% increase in the number of properties that were recovered through the year. So I think that was 84, 86 from the top of my head. So that's been a really good news story for me through the year. There were significant returns from investigations arising from the National Fraud Initiative data matching exercise. You'll recall that that's a biennial exercise. The results were last received at the start of 2019, and the figures set out in the report relate to the achievements this year. That's not the total for the 2 years, that's for this year's work. That because it's a biennial exercise, the year-on-year results are slightly less comparable. But if I look back to the 2016 NFI, there has been a considerable increase in the outcomes, largely because of results from council tax single person discount investigations. A large number of those were cancelled when it was cross-referenced to other information that indicated there was more than one person in the household, and investigation backed that up. The only other area I've got highlighted on that is the RIPA activity, which for many years at Hackney has been nil. We haven't carried out any regulations of investigatory powers surveillance activity. It remains as an option if it's needed for our investigations. We were inspected right at the end of the year and we passed that with flying colours, I'm delighted to say. So RIPA remains as an option for the council should the need arise in future. So that's a look back at the year and the performance. In terms of how things have changed since the lockdown started and there was the shift to work from home, that has impacted work, obviously. Investigators are still busy taking forward cases through desk-based investigations. There were a number of ongoing inquiries at the start of the year. So, for example, there were 70 parking investigations. There were 240 tenancy investigations that were needing to be looked at. So it's not that there's a lack of work. There's also a fair number, particularly of those tenancy investigations that are with legal services at that stage of the process. And there's also a fair bit of work going on to prepare statements and action the case so it's ready for court again as and when we're ready to start that process moving again. So there's plenty of activity. The problem that we have is that obviously you'll appreciate with most investigations there comes a point where we need to talk to the person that's the subject of the investigation or indeed witnesses to the case, and that is difficult at the moment. The advice understandably is that we should not be engaging with people in their homes unless it's essential, and this work is not essential in the grand scheme of things, much as I might consider it important any other time. So it's not possible to conduct those visits. It's not possible, by and large, to conduct interviews with suspects or with subjects of investigations. So there is this period in the middle of an inquiry where we have difficulty moving things through that at the moment. So in addition to continuing to move cases forward on as best we can, there's also been a considerable amount of support that's been given to the business rates team. You'll appreciate that council officers are available for redeployment to important and essential tasks at the moment. So we've made use of the investigation skill set to support business rates with the influx of unfamiliar work that they've had, A, to help with some of the admin around that, and B, to provide an extra level of scrutiny where concerns have been raised on particular cases. And then following on from that extra level of scrutiny, the business rates applications for grants are part of a data matching exercise at the moment, so we can have a look and provide that extra level of assurance that actually people applying for grants are entitled to them, and take action, obviously, where there's question marks that might arise. And then there's also been some redeployment of staff to some other functions. So there's been a couple of officers that have been helping out in the Borough Emergency Command Centre. We've got someone helping to manage a hostel at the moment. So it's a mix of taking things forward as best we can and being flexible to assist other areas of the council where that help is needed. With regard to the concerns for the future, so in addition to that part of the investigation process where there is interruption, there has been changes to legislation that impacts on the work. So no evictions are taking place for housing cases at the moment. To a large degree, that's completely understandable and the right thing to do. I suppose the frustration for me is that is a blanket policy. It doesn't take into effect the nuances of the difference between someone who can't pay their rent because of hardship due to COVID and someone where a fraud investigation has identified evidence that the tenancy has been misused. But nevertheless, we're in that position until toward the end of August as things stand, before tenancy cases will be able to move forward in that way. In terms of the level of referrals of work coming into the team, in some areas there has been quite a dramatic reduction. So perhaps not surprisingly, the parking referrals for Blue Badge have come down by 3/4. For tenancy, they've come down by nearly 1/3. So that's a reflection of people not being out and about, driving and doing things. It's a consequence of housing officers not being on the estates to the same degree, not being in people's houses to refer matters onwards, what have you. But that's not an across the board picture. Referrals in other areas have held up, so inquiries are continuing there. I would also flag that I'm expecting that later in the year there will probably be a fraud consequence of COVID, in that we will probably have referrals relating to some of the business rates grants. We will most likely have possible procurement issues. I note for the first time today the police were notifying that there have been attempts to make use of the track and trace system for fraudulent purposes, so phishing exercises and trying to dupe people into parting with information that they shouldn't. So that's outside of our particular remit, but it's just an example that where there's an opportunity for people to behave dishonestly, unfortunately, that there are a small minority that will take advantage of that. And then the consequence of all this really is that the level of outcomes in certain areas have declined quite significantly. So if I look at just the first 2 months of the year and compare the outcomes on parking and tenancy, parking last year there were 15 outcomes, there's 6 this year to date. On the tenancy side there were 15 outcomes by this stage, there's currently 3. I'm pleased to say that in some other areas, for example, no recourse to public funds, the numbers are holding up much better. And one of the consequences of not being able to follow through on some of the tenancy issues is that we have put renewed focus onto the housing applications matches that we received through the National Fraud Initiative, and there's been a higher number of outcomes there. So that's a flavour of how the last year's been, where we are at the moment, and some of the concerns that I would see for the year ahead. So I will stop talking there and hand over for any questions that there might be.
Great, thanks very much, Michael. I mean, I'm delighted to see, I think Michelle put it well, that how there's been a flexible response to the change risk profile. It might be helpful on that to re-profile your target so that when we come back, you've got some targets that are appropriate to the situation rather than to the past. But I'll maybe take that discussion forward. Right, I had a couple of points, one from Patrick and the other from Sharon.
Yeah, I put my question up in the chat, but yeah, it relates to the table at 6.7 about the tenancy fraud investigations, and in particular the right to buy applications. I think it'd be helpful to know what the total number of right to buy applications we have over the year, and therefore we can see what percentage of those are either cancelled or withdrawn as a result of your investigations. My impression is that right to buy applications generally have fallen in number. I might be wrong about that, partly because house prices have made it more expensive for tenants to consider.
Great, thanks for that. Sharon, you had a point too, and then I'll ask Michael to come back on both.
Just unmute myself, sorry. Yeah, I was curious, in the table it talks about work around pension fraud, and I just wondered what the work was around pension fraud and what pension fraud was exactly, because I've seen we're talking about council pensions, and people don't get to choose how much they get paid, presumably. I wonder if perhaps someone could tell me what the work is and what the issues are. Sorry, I'm new to this. I'm not a member, but I think it's very interesting.
Yeah. Great. No, but thanks, Sharon. Very, very helpful. Michael, do you want to have a crack at?
Yeah, certainly. So with regard to the right to buy, you're absolutely correct, Councillor Spence. The numbers have come down as house prices have increased. In terms of what the numbers are, I don't have that information to hand, but I will take that away and I will come back to you outside the meeting with those numbers. Okay.
Again, can you make sure that the rest of us are included in the briefings of that sort?
Certainly. With regard to the reference to pensions, I believe that will be listed under the National Fraud Initiative section of the report, which is part 9. So the concerns that we have there is that obviously there's conditions to a pension being paid. So the National Fraud Initiative will match Hackney's pension payments to a number of other databases. So it will look and compare if someone who's receiving a Hackney pension is actually working for another local authority or somewhere where they would be required to declare that, and it would have an impact on the pension. It also gets compared to deceased persons from various databases. So it's not that someone has actively made a representation to the council that's wrong and they've told us the wrong date of birth or anything, but it's where they've gone on to work somewhere else, or where the pensioner may have passed away and we haven't been told, and that leads to an overpayment and someone else could be pocketing the difference. So that's how that type of fraud operates.
Right, thanks for that, Michael. I'm not seeing any other questions. In that case, thanks very much. And as I say, I think we're really pleased to see fraud adapting, but it would be good perhaps at the next next reporting, just to see where we're going and how we're shaping up the risk areas. You mentioned the business grants. I suspect there may be others. Well, and track and trace could be one of them, where we need to turn our attention. I think we need to be aware of where the medium-term tasks are as well as the short-term. Great stuff. Okay, I think we're into the final item, which is the work program. And here, Ian, I'm we have our next meeting is scheduled for July. Depends presumably on some report on the account. And just be interested, Lucy, while you're on, just to say where you think you're getting your perspective on the audit. And also to say thanks for joining us. I think it's an excellent initiative that our external auditors should be part of this process. So I don't know, Ian and Lucy, I'm addressing those points to immediately.
Thank you, Chair. I'll kick off. As Ian said at the start of the meeting, we did just start our field work this week. We don't have a published statement of accounts yet. They'll come later in the week. We have started work on the pension fund. There are a lot of technical issues arising through COVID that we do need to work through. Remote auditing is not as efficient as actually being in the town hall and being able to pop down and speak to James and Michael. But best endeavours to get there. At this point, there's no indication we won't. But there is a lot to get done.
Great. Well, I'm sure the will, as always, with our excellent finance department, is to help with that process, because I would very much like us to hold to it, because it seems to me that it makes it, rather than a piece of historical information, which it so often is, it is still very relevant, and particularly to establish our baseline going forward. So, yeah, Ian, do you want to just come in on your thoughts about our meeting in July?
Yeah, so I think I would, as Lucy's outlined really nice, I said earlier, the teams are progressing. There are obviously always going to be challenges with it, but we're all committed to giving it our best shot to get to a place where we're in a position as we were last year to get this over the line, because we all recognise the merits in having the accounts presented to Audit Committee in a timely fashion. So that's what we're working towards. It probably would also be an opportunity to give an update on where we are with the councils. The other discussion we've had earlier as well. By that stage, we'll have progressed further on the work we've already commenced. So I envisage including something on that as well.
No, I would have expected that. And also I want to make sure that we do a regular report back formally to this committee, as well as sort of informal updates, which Michelle and I will give to people from our work. But no, there should be a formal review, not least because, as you say, by July we should have the beginning of an understanding about what our options are. Because this is not going to be done in July. This is going to be a process over the next period. Great stuff. Any other business? Yes, Harvey, please come in.
Sorry, just had a bit of a problem unmuting myself. I wasn't sure where this would come in, but I was just wondering, in terms of the mess that's TfL's finances and the huge reduction in our parking revenue, most of the surplus in which goes towards the Freedom Pass, is our commitment to the Freedom Pass a fixed amount, or is it our total profit on the parking? And where do we stand with, where the whole flux in the thing, especially with the now reduction in the hours of the Freedom Pass?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that, Chair, if that's okay.
Yeah, please do. Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you very much for that question, Councillor Odds, and absolutely, we've all seen and read about the challenges that TfL are facing in terms of their financial position, which is quite stark. I think they were as close as any local authority's been to having to issue a Section 114 notice, and obviously they've managed to get to a place that effectively has bridged them through to what I understand almost the end of September in reality. There's quite a few sort of wrinkles in that agreement, for want of a better word, in terms of, you mentioned there the changes to the times that people in receipt of Freedom Pass can use the Freedom Pass and use the buses and use their Freedom Pass to get on them. But in addition to that, as part of the deal, there was also expectation of a change to the under-18s access to things as well, in particular home to school transport. And there's a lot of work going on with the boroughs to understand what potentially the deal that was struck with TfL and government means for boroughs and boroughs' finances, which hasn't to date appeared in any of the returns that we've submitted so far. I attended on behalf of the Society of London Treasurers a sort of cross-London meeting of directors of children's, chief execs and London Council officials to start to unpick what that can look like for London, and probably in a position at the next meeting, if not before, to give an update on that. But in terms of the concessionary fares pass, and it's a question I have been asked a few times now, is I don't know how long people's memories on concessionary fares go back, but a good number of years ago, over 10 years ago, it moved away from effectively being done on a sort of a per capita basis, for want of a better word, to being done on a usage basis as the Oyster card became more utilised and as the technology became more real. And basically what happens is that the way that the total bill for concessionary fares is apportioned to boroughs is effectively on the average use by borough residents who were in receipt of a concessionary fares pass over the previous 2 years. So if that makes sense, it's like any reduction in our charge because of COVID-19 won't kick in until the charge is reapportioned using the data within which the COVID period, and in particular the most extreme bit of the COVID period where actually no one was using any public transport almost, was in play. So what that really means, in answer to your questions, is that we're not anticipating or see no reason why our concessionary fare bill will reduce, and hence that is going to be something which is part of our cost pressures going forwards. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, basically it means we're paying more for, well, we're paying virtually the same and have got a lot less coming in from what we were using it for.
Yes, that's, yeah.
I fear that's not the only place this will be. That will be.
No, indeed.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. I must say I wasn't aware that there was now a use basis rather than a per capita basis in the allocation. So
it was, there was a 3-year transition into that as the technology and the all kicked in.
Mm. Great stuff. Any other points colleagues want to raise? Great. Well, can I thank everyone? Really informative meeting, and if one which a lot of worry and concerns over the futures, the implications of COVID really wind through us. But we have got opportunity, as Ian said, to have another look in July. And I suppose the only other point to raise is that I do want to make sure that we have this, or utilise the sort of the deep dive methodology where that's appropriate on the subjects that we think it's appropriate. So again, I'm very much up for any suggestions people might have about where we might do a deeper investigation from the range of issues we've raised this evening. So with that, and I'm not seeing any indication, can I thank everyone for an excellent meeting, and particularly for other councillors who've been attending the meeting. I think it's really one of the benefits of having this virtual meeting. Great, and Michael has indicated that we will be the Chief Exec's report on the October risk register. Good stuff. Okay, thanks, and see you all in July, if not before.
Cool. See you, everyone.
Yeah. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.